Welcome back to the Working Well podcast, and episode 17 in the 52 Life Lessons series. Today's lesson is about the power of upgrading your self-talk. And the first step in upgrading your self-talk starts with understanding your inner dialogue, because the most important conversation in your life is the one happening inside your own head. That conversation is going on right now. Now, I know it can sound a bit cliche, but stick with me. What we're talking about isn't fake positivity, fluffy affirmations, or standing in front of the mirror claiming that you're some majestic unicorn of abundance. And meanwhile, everything else in your life is chaos and in shambles. Upgrading your self-talk is about performance, leadership, relationships, and so much more. For many of us, tuning into our inner dialogue is about realizing that the voice we've been calling us, or the truth, for decades, might actually be an old, outdated, reflexive coping pattern that's running in the background. As I mentioned briefly in a previous episode, my internal self-talk was incredibly critical and damaging to myself for much of my life. But the biggest issue was that I didn't see it that way. To me, it was just how I was. That voice in my head felt like me through and through. I didn't question it or examine it. I didn't stop to ask, is what it's saying useful or true? Is this how I'd speak to someone I care about? And that's an important one. Often we speak to ourselves in ways that we would never speak to anyone that we remotely cared about. But when we go back to this voice in our head, for me, it was familiar. And familiar has a sneaky way of beginning to feel true. But familiar and true are absolutely not the same thing. And that distinction became one of the most important realizations of my life. For most of my life, I believed I could improve. I believed I could learn. I believed that growth was possible. But all of that improvement was filtered through a harsh inner critic. When I accomplished something, there was very little self-recognition or celebration. The voice in my head didn't say, hey, great job. Take a break. Let's appreciate this. It was more like, great, you accomplished that, but here's what we really need to do next. Or, yeah, you hit that goal, but you could have done it better. Or there's the classic high performer special that don't get too excited about this win. You're still behind and you have a long way to go to prove yourself. Now, from the outside, this type of self-talk sounds completely ridiculous. We would never talk to someone we cared about this way. Yet for so many of us, it's the daily norm. And here's the strange part. I knew a lot about mindset at that time even. I have a psychology degree. I had read Carol Dweck's mindset book many times, along with lots of other books on performance, psychology, growth, and behavior change. I understood the competitive mindset from my years as an athlete. I'd coached clients for decades on taming their inner critics and shifting the way they thought, acted, and performed each day. And to be fair, I was pretty good at managing my own inner critic at certain times. In sports, health, fitness, I had learned to use self-talk strategically. I understood preparation. I understood focus and emotional control, and the difference between pressure and panic. But in other areas of life, things like money and business and self-worth, my inner critic was running wild. For some reason, and I guess it looks like I had created different departments in my brain that had a inner critic or had not an inner critic in other areas. You know, the elite athlete was here and the business and self-worth chaos was over here. While it may have been somewhat organized, it was not useful or helpful. And after coaching hundreds of clients, I know that this is something many leaders and high performers can relate to. You can be highly developed in one area of life and surprisingly underdeveloped in another. You can be calm in a crisis at work, then brutal to yourself or your family at home. You can coach your team with patience and perspective, and then talk to yourself like the worst toxic boss on the planet. You can help other people see their strengths while dismissing or diminishing every single one of your own. You can be externally successful and consider yourself a complete failure. And that's a strange place to live. It's a very tough place to live as well. High performers rarely call this self-criticism. They call it having high standards. They don't call it fear. They call it discipline. Shame becomes another word for accountability. Now, I'm a big fan of standards, discipline, and accountability. Those are all important. But when they're powered by fear, shame, and relentless self-judgment, the cost is massive. And you may still achieve a goal and perform well. You might get the promotion or build the business or win the award or create an incredibly impressive resume. But if the voice inside your head never lets you arrive, never lets you celebrate, never lets you feel like enough, success always feels hollow. The game changer for me came during a period where several catalytic factors hit me at the same time. Business and career change, a global pandemic, health challenges, the loss of a parent, turning 50, upgrading my education, and doing a lot of deep reflection. I'm talking about the kind of reflection where you finally get below the surface and start to comprehend the crap that's buried under the floorboards of your belief system. It was during this time that I began to truly interrogate my values, my beliefs, my goals, failures, successes, identity, and self-talk. As I mentioned in the inaugural episode, this life lesson series came out of an exercise to reflect on what I felt were the most valuable lessons I had learned through the first 50 years of my life. At first, that exercise was personal. It wasn't a podcast strategy, not an attempt to package wisdom in a tiny bow. It was an attempt to make meaning from my life and experiences, to pause, to look honestly at the specific factors that helped shape me the most. What had helped me? What had hurt me? What did I want to carry forward into the next 50 plus years of my life? Because I plan on living that long. And what emotional bricks did I desperately need to stop dragging around my life? Going back to school for postgraduate studies and executive coaching was also a major catalyst. That extra level of self-reflection, combined with the opportunity to be coached by phenomenal coaches, helped me cut through my hubris and get closer to the core of who I was and who I wanted to become. And yes, hubris is the polite word for my prior state of mind. That process was extremely challenging and painful at times, but it was also incredibly freeing because I finally realized something important. I wasn't trapped inside those old scripts. That voice wasn't me. It was simply a pattern. And patterns can be changed. One of the models that became truly inspirational and practical for me during this growth journey was positive intelligence, developed by Shirzad Chamine. Put simply, positive intelligence, or PQ as it's known, is a mental framework or mental fitness framework that helps people recognize when their mind is working for them versus working against them. The PQ framework provides clarity and structure to the ongoing battles between what you call your inner sage and your saboteur. Now, whether or not you use the PQ language or similar terms such as growth versus fixed mindset or the angel and devil on your shoulders, the foundational idea is recognizable and resonates deeply for most people. Your saboteurs, they're the habits and ways of thinking that are often driven by outdated protective instincts. They're the coping strategies and behavioral patterns typically developed early in life that at some point helped you survive, succeed, and avoid rejection, gain approval, or stay in control of some situation. The problem is, many of these patterns just have stopped working for us. They've become like old software. They're still running and consuming energy, but continually creating glitches, ineffectiveness, and unnecessary challenges. Examples of PQ saboteurs include the judge, the avoider, the controller, the pleaser, the victim, hyperachievers, and several others. While we all have a variety of saboteurs operating with us each day, I want to take a closer look at the hyperachiever for a second, because that one tends to show up a lot in corporate leadership circles. Hyperachievers are often the ones that get promoted. They hit their targets, they win awards, they build teams and businesses. They look fantastic on paper. But internally, the hyperachiever is brutal. It ties self-worth to the next win, the next deal, your next milestone or promotion, that external scoreboard of life. And when that scoreboard isn't in your favor, the hyperachiever rarely says, hey, you're still a worthy human being. Let's learn from this challenge and use it to get better. It says, what the hell is wrong with you? You're useless. You'd better get your shit together or everyone's going to see you as a failure. And logically, we know that's not kind or helpful or even a sign of good leadership. Yet it's so prevalent in the corporate world. The thing about the saboteurs is that they always accompany negative emotions. And despite what our saboteur mind will tell us, they never produce optimal outcomes. Sure, you can get results from a saboteur mindset, but on the other side of the PQ framework is the sage perspective. Your sage is your wisest self. It's grounded in empathy, curiosity, exploration, innovation, and clear action. An important fact that often gets overlooked is that your sage isn't delusional. It's not some pie in the sky nirvana that's not achievable. The sage doesn't pretend everything is wonderful when it's actually going sideways. The sage faces reality directly, but it does so without negativity, blame, or other counterproductive emotions. Instead of asking, why am I such a failure? Or how did I let this happen? Or even, what will people think? The sage asks, what's actually true here? What can I learn? And what is the next useful action? What is aligned with my values and the person I want to become? And that shift matters because the questions we ask ourselves determine the quality of the answers we have access to. A saboteur question narrows the world, whereas a sage question opens it. And the strategy with PQ is to recognize and label your saboteurs while practicing simple mental fitness reps that help you shift from saboteur to sage. And these practices are called PQ reps, and they can be done in as little as 10 seconds. Often they involve bringing your attention to some physical sensation, such as your breath or the present moment, or any type of physical stimulus. Now, with a degree in psychology and a lifetime of mindset training experience as an athlete and performance coach, the principles underpinning positive intelligence weren't new to me. Self-awareness, emotional regulation, attention control, growth mindset, cognitive reframing, mindfulness, self-compassion. These concepts are all well documented and researched. But I had never had them explained in such a simple, intuitive, and easily applicable way across every area of life. That was the powerful part. The science that Shirzad built the PQ model on draws strong underlying research in psychology, neuroscience, performance psychology, behavior change. From my own experience and from seeing clients apply these principles, the results in the moment can feel almost magical. Now, not magic in the supernatural sense, magic in the I can't believe 10 seconds of focused awareness just stopped me from sending that poorly written, spicy email, which frankly is practical magic. Now, research supports all of these underlying principles. Self-talk has been studied extensively in sport and performance contexts. Research has shown that structured self-talk can improve performance, especially when it's trained as a skill rather than treated as some sort of motivational confetti. Other research on third-person self-talk suggests that speaking to yourself using your own name or from a slightly more distanced perspective can help regulate emotion. Now, that may sound odd at first, but there's a real difference between saying, I'm overwhelmed, and saying, Tim's feeling overwhelmed right now, and he needs to slow down to choose the next useful step. Or my saboteur is feeling overwhelmed and is impacting how I'm acting. Yeah, it feels a bit weird, but it works. That small shift creates psychological distance and helps us observe the emotion without being swallowed by it. There's also research showing that mindful attention to the breath, for example, can influence emotional regulation and supports the connection between brain regions, the ones involving emotion and decision making. In plain English, when we pause, we breathe, we're able to bring our attention back to the body. We're not just doing soft stuff. We're directly impacting our physiology and our psychology in ways that give the nervous system a chance to shift gears. And that matters because leaders under stress rarely make the best decisions when their nervous system is in crisis mode. You've probably been there. You react out of emotion, you defend, you avoid, you try and control the situation, over control it. You're maybe people pleasing or overworking and then withdrawing. People that are in crisis mode and stressed send emails that probably never should have been written. And this is where self-talk becomes a leadership skill, because leaders don't leave their inner dialogue at home. They bring it into every meeting, every decision, every conflict, every coaching conversation, and every moment of uncertainty. A leader whose inner dialogue is dominated by judgment will struggle to create psychological safety. A leader whose inner dialogue is dominated by fear will struggle to make bold decisions. When it's dominated by scarcity, they'll make short-term decisions that damage long-term trust, culture, and performance. And a dialogue dominated by shame will often struggle to receive feedback without defensiveness. In the same line, a dialogue that never allows rest, recovery, or celebration will unintentionally teach the team that burnout is the cost of excellence. On the flip side, a leader who has trained their self-talk creates a very different environment. They can pause instead of reacting, ask instead of assume. They repair instead of defend, challenge instead of shaming. They can hold high standards without making people feel small. And again, this isn't fluffy stuff. This is powerful, operational, and scalable because the internal state of leaders becomes the operating environment of the teams they lead. Your self-talk shapes your leadership talk. Your leadership talk shapes team behavior. Team behavior shapes culture. Culture shapes performance. And performance shapes the business. This is why inner dialogue matters so much in the corporate world. The way people think, speak, recover, relate, and lead directly affects things like trust, energy, innovation, execution, and results. Now, for me personally, one of the most interesting realizations was that I had unknowingly been using many of these principles and techniques in sport and client work for decades. I just hadn't applied them to all areas of my own life. That realization was both humbling, a bit frustrating, but profoundly powerful. And now I regularly see clients go through this same realization. They'll say things like, I'm great at coaching my team, but I'm terrible at coaching myself. I would never speak to someone the way I speak to myself. Or I thought this pressure was just part of being successful. That awareness is often the first crack in the old identity. And that crack is where the light starts to get in. Now, to bring this back to self-talk, I now regularly realize that my judge and several key accomplice saboteurs, as PQ system calls them, were running my internal scripts for decades. It's refreshing to now have the awareness and the tools to recognize when I've shifted into saboteur mode and how to quickly return to operating from the sage perspective. Now, it's not perfect. Of course, I'm still human. My saboteurs still show up. The difference is that I recognize them faster, I believe them less, and I give them less authority. Instead of being this big gorilla in the room, they become this little tiny voice sitting on a bench in the corner that's not really impacting my situation. Yes, I'm aware of it, but I can quickly move back to sage. And again, this means I recover to sage faster. And that's helped me become a better parent, spouse, coach, and leader. Because I can notice when my saboteurs are taking over, I'm also able to recognize when someone else's saboteurs may be running the show. And it's transformed my interactions with people and myself. Instead of reacting to the surface behavior, I can get curious about the pattern underneath it. Instead of taking everything personally, I can pause and ask, what might be driving this? That one shift can dramatically improve relationships at home, at work, in coaching conversations, in leadership teams, moments of conflict. Through executive coaching, I've seen this play out with leaders and teams again and again. Small, seemingly insignificant daily changes begin to transform how each person shows up. A few seconds of pause before responding. Maybe it's a breath before a difficult conversation. A different question after someone makes a mistake, or you make a mistake. A moment of reflection or recognition after a win. A shift from what's wrong with me to what can I learn here? Now, these sound very small, but they're definitely not. They compound exponentially over time to create outsized impacts on well-being, trust, performance, and how you show up each day. So here's a simple practice that you can use this week. I call it the 4 N's. Notice, name, neutralize, and navigate. First, we notice the self-talk. Pay attention to the phrases you repeat. Things like, I should be further ahead. I always mess this up. Or, they're going to think I'm incompetent. Notice the script. Don't judge it. Just notice it. The next step is to name the pattern. Is this the judge or one of the other accomplice saboteurs, like the controller, the pleaser, the avoider? You don't need to make it complicated. Just naming it creates distance. Instead of saying, I'm failing, you can say, my judge is telling me I'm failing. And that's a very different sentence with a very different impact. The third step is to neutralize the negativity or the impact that it's having on you. Taking a breath. Feel your feet on the floor. Rub your fingertips together so you can just feel the ridges of the fingertips. Look around the room. Focus on a certain object. Go for a short walk. Do something that connects you to your body and interrupts the emotional hijack that's going on. Once you've been able to downregulate your nervous system in that moment, you're able to shift to sage. And so the fourth step is navigate. Ask your sage questions. What's actually true? What matters most right now? What's within my control? What's the next most useful action? Or what would I say to someone I care about if they were in this exact situation? That final question is powerful because many of us speak to ourselves in ways that we would never speak to someone we love. Certainly not our children, not to friends, clients, or teammates. So think about how we would respond if it was someone else. Now, 5 years ago, I was confident I had my mindset dialed in. Now I realize how mistaken I was. And honestly, that realization has been one of the most freeing experiences of my life. Because if my self-talk wasn't fixed, neither was I. If those old scripts were learned, they could be rewritten. And despite the incredible shifts over the past few years, I now believe I've only scratched the surface of what upgraded self-talk can provide. And that's the beauty of this lesson. The goal is not to eliminate negative thoughts. That's not realistic. Your brain will continue to produce strange, dramatic, unhelpful thoughts. That's just part of being human. The brain is a meaning-making machine. The goal is not to believe every thought you have. The goal is to build enough awareness and skill that you can choose which thoughts deserve leadership authority. To put it in the business sense, not every thought gets a seat at the executive table. Some thoughts need to sit quietly in the lobby until they calm down, and many are never going to make it past the gatekeeper. So this week, pay attention to your inner dialogue. Not with judgment. That would be, beautifully ironic and entirely unhelpful. Pay attention with curiosity. What does your inner voice say when you make a mistake? What does it say when you succeed? What about when you're at rest? What does it say when you look in the mirror or before a difficult conversation? Or when you're considering taking a bold step? Then it's time to ask, is this voice helping me become the better person, leader, parent, spouse, or friend, and human that I want to be? If not, it might be time for an upgrade, because the most important conversation in your life is the one happening in your own head. And my goal is to make it one worth listening to. I wish you all the best. If you feel like coaching would help you navigate these changes, please reach out through timborys.com or on LinkedIn. I will see you in the next episode. That wraps up another episode of the Working Well podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Now, which guests or topics would you like to see featured on the show? Message me through LinkedIn or on the contact page of timborys.com with your ideas. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tim Borys with Fresh Wellness Group, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.